One really cool thing we can do to objects is metablobs. And now we can see the metablob symbol, create metablob object, right over here on the left. But in order for that to work, we need to have some objects in the scene. So let's go ahead and just load in a couple of simple objects. I'm going to load in a sphere and a cylinder, and I'm also going to load in a box. And I'm just going to line these up next to each other right now. Add a cone, and then I'm also going to add a torus on the top. Now, in order to create a metablob, what we're going to need to do is actually sort of group these objects together. I'm going to select all of them within the Layers panel, select our top object first, hold down Shift, and select our torus, which will select all of the objects in between. And then if we go to our metablob, we can create metablob object. And what this is going to do is actually blend together all of our objects to create a metablob. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that. In our scene here, we'll go ahead and zoom in just a little bit more. And we can see that we don't see a preview of our metablob actually in the scene, but if we take a look at the side preview over here, we can see that our objects are blended together. And I'm going to go ahead and raise up our sun just a little, just a little bit brighter, and we can actually see this object just a little bit better. We can see that all of our objects are nicely blending to each other. And if we go in and actually select individual objects, we can go in and adjust exactly the thickness of certain objects, and of course their envelope distance, and the intensity of the metablob. We can see that adjust the overall of our entire scene with all of our objects together. But what we can do is actually use this to build some pretty neat shapes. And of course this works negative as well. So we can actually do booleans with this as well. I'm going to grab our cone, double click, and we can add subtractive and click OK. And what that's going to do is delete our cone on the end and actually subtract from our metablob. If we take a look in our preview, we can see that. So I'm just going to go ahead and render this really quickly. We can take a look, see how it looks as a finished render. I'm just going to position our camera on the other side where the light's at. And I'm going to go to our render options, select Final, Render to Screen, 640 by 480. I also want to make this 16 by 9 render. Click OK, and render. And if we take a look at our finished render here, we can see that everything is really, really nicely blended together. Like I said, this is a really neat way to make certain types of shapes. You could even make human faces with it, creatures. You could do just about any sort of modeling with these metablobs to make primitive shapes into more advanced shapes. And if you need to edit anything at all, like I said, we can go ahead and actually double click on specific instances and specific parts of our metablob, certain objects, and we can adjust, of course, like I said, the intensity and the envelope distance, which is the easiest way to really see what that's doing is to actually take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and render that again now that we've actually adjusted that distance. And by making those adjustments, we can see that we actually lost some of the overall thickness of our object, more specifically where this cylinder is right here. And that sort of just gave away because we turned down our distances between things, and of course how far apart they have to be to affect each other. So there's another example I can show you of that. I'm going to go ahead and turn off and delete the metablobs, and I'm going to add two spheres and just put them fairly close to each other and then create a metablob out of them, which we can also do by selecting these just by dragging on the screen, clicking, and highlighting over them. You can also use the layer panel as we did before. Let's go ahead and reposition our camera just a little so we can see it in this preview just a little bit better. What we can see is we have it nicely connecting in the center. But of course, as we adjust our envelope distance, we'll increase it just a little bit higher. We can see the overall effect is much more, and we have it blending together much closer. But as we actually adjust these individual objects, you can see that it does pull away if they're too far away from each other. So the envelope distance pretty much adjusts how close they have to be in order for them to sort of blend together and affect each other. And as I'm moving it closer and closer, we can see it refreshing and actually joining our objects closer and closer. And the more we, of course, adjust these, we can also decrease our intensity, and I'm just doing this one specific sphere right now on the left. But we can take a look and see that it completely disappeared because the settings were too far down. Now let's go ahead and actually move around the sphere a little, pull it back, closer to our other object, and we really can't even see it at this point. So they can be a little touchy of settings at some points. But the best thing to really do is sort of play around with it until, of course, you get it to exactly the way you want it. So metablobs are a very cool tool in Vue.